Montana Ag Live is made possible by the Montana Department of Agriculture, MSU Extension, the MSU Ag Experiment Station of the College of Agriculture, the Montana Wheat and Barley Committee, Cashman Nursery and Landscaping, and the Gallatin Gardeners Club.
You're watching Montana Ag Live, originating today from the studios of KUSM on the dynamic campus of Montana State University, and coming to you over your Montana Public Television system. I'm Jack Rieselman, a retired professor of plant pathology. Happy to be your host this evening. You know how the program works. You provide the questions. We try to provide the best answers possible, and we do guess once in a while, but most of the time we do have pretty significant answers to your questions. Tonight's going to be kind of a fun program, a little bit different than normal, and you'll find out in a moment. This evening's panel, I'm going to start on the far left. Jane Mangold. Jane is our invasive plant specialist. Actually, I prefer to call her a weed scientist. Joe Schumacher, an entomologist. I was going to call you an entomologist. It's an economist. But if you want to be an entomologist tonight, we'll let you do that too.
Hey, we'll see how it goes.
Okay. And joining us tonight, and this is kind of a special evening, we have President Seth Bodner of the University of Montana on with us. And you know,
Everybody.
We have two universities in this state. The university, well, we have several, but two major universities, University of Montana and Montana State University. The public television system is a joint effort by these two universities, and we've really been negligent in involving the University of Montana because they do a lot for agriculture in the state, for the economy of the state, and we're going to find out a lot more about that this evening. So if you have questions about the University of Montana and what they do, the programs, we'll get to it this evening. Abby Saeed. Abby is our horticulturist, and answering the phones tonight are Nancy Blake and Cadence Lamori. So get on that phone and make those calls coming in. And before we go any farther, Seth, thank you for joining us via Zoom this evening. Tell us a little bit about some of the things that the University of Montana does relative to agriculture.
Yeah, well, thanks, Jack. It is great to be here and thrilled. We're very happy to be on this show and be part of the discussion. We're grateful for the partnership between University of Montana and MSU when it comes to Montana PBS, when it comes to this program, when it comes to thinking about issues that matter to Montanans. Our university is very complementary. When you have in terms of an ag and engineering school there in Bozeman and a whole host of other disciplines, of course. And then at the University of Montana, it's everything from the top wildlife biology program in the country to tremendous forestry and ecology and natural sciences. So a lot that we do for this state and a lot we do together as flagship universities. So I'm just really excited to be here and engage in the dialogue with you.
And I'm going to add a little bit to that before I come back to you, but over the next year or two, we're going to have several people that have programs at the University of Montana on this program because there are a lot of unique and very important research programs that go on at the University of Montana. Seth, I have to ask you a question. I was on a plane, United, I'm not promoting United, but they have a magazine called Hemispheres. And right in the middle of that magazine was a one-page ad by the University of Montana discussing some of the programs you have, how well your students do, but it also said that you are an R1 university. Would you share what an R1 university is with the audience?
Yeah, thanks, Chuck. It's a good question. And we've been trying to be more vocal about that and about just the diversity of academic programs and research happening at the University of Montana. And a lot of people think, hey, you got a STEM school in the state, and then you got your liberal arts school. And look, we have tremendous liberal arts at the University of Montana, but we have tremendous STEM as well. And as evidenced by this designation as an R1 research university. So this is a designation given by the Carnegie Classic classification of universities. It's really limited to about 4% of universities. And the university has achieved this R1 status, which is highest output that a university can have. And that's just really a testament to the growing research enterprise that we have at the University of Montana. And I think an interesting stat is, there's about 146 universities that have reached this R1 designation. So again, these are your top tier research universities, those universities doing the cutting edge research happening in this country. Of those 146 universities that have achieved this status, only 2 have done so without having either a College of Engineering or a medical school. And those 2 are the University of Oregon and the University of Montana. And I think it's really a testament to the University of Montana's strength in the natural sciences, in things like forestry, wildlife biology, ecology. It's really a great thing for our state.
Thank you. And we'll come back to Seth. I have a couple questions already that have come in through this thing we call a mini computer. And we also have a couple questions that came in during the week, knowing that Seth was going to be on the program, from Facebook and through email. But before we get back to Seth, Jane from Bozeman. This person wants to know if you can get rid of Canada thistle by mowing. And I'd hate to see the entire Bozeman City flower disappear, but
well, I don't think you have to worry about that, Jack. We're not going to completely get rid of the Canada thistle. You can contain and kind of control Canada thistle through mowing. You have to do, if you're going to take that approach, you have to mow repeatedly throughout the growing season for 4 or 5 years at least. So you have to be very persistent and diligent. But by mowing it, every time you mow it, it uses some of those root reserves to try to grow back. And by mowing it over and over and over again, you can start to reduce the sugars, carbohydrates in the roots, and just weaken the plant overall. And it probably won't completely go away, but other plants trying to grow with it will be more competitive with it.
yeah, that's a good point. I'll bring up something about weed control. I've been around Montana for a long, long time. But Missoula, over at the University of Montana, there was a partnership that worked with Jerry Marks, who was a county agent and Montana State University, in trying to rid that area of several noxious weeds, but specifically leafy spurge. And that was a nice cooperation that occurred between the 2 universities. So I just had to throw that in.
Yeah, I have a whole list of things here that U of M has done with invasive plants. They've done amazing work with noxious weeds and invasive plants over the years, trying to understand the ecology of those plants like Seth was talking about, and also trying to understand the ecological effects of us managing noxious weeds. Because sometimes some of the things we do to manage weeds can have non-target effects, and we want to know what those are as well.
So speaking of noxious weeds and invasive plants, Seth, you have a program over at the U of M about invasive species, and you have a couple individuals, I believe, working on that. Do you and Jane want to cover a little bit about that?
Well, we look at, invasive species, whether it's plant, biological invasive species as well. We were actually talking a little bit before the show about the Flathead Lake Biological Station. And really the work that they do to protect, it's really called the Sentinel of the Lake, looking at the potential for zebra mussels, which we all know as you drive over and get that boat check, that the last thing we want to do is see zebra mussels in Flathead Lake, and just a tremendous amount of expertise at the Flathead Lake Biological Station, and not just understanding but detecting through DNA analysis in large bodies of water the presence of aquatic invasive species. So we obviously, as Jane mentioned, and I will defer to her in terms of the plant research, because she's the expert on that front, and I know we have a lot of good partnerships, as she mentioned, on the from a plant standpoint, but really runs the spectrum from plants to animals as well, and really important that we monitor those and better understand them.
I'm going to say the entire state is in a partnership with invasive species. The Department of Ag, University of Montana, Montana State University. we do have a lot of invasive species in this state, and it takes the entire state to do a good job in managing them. Joel, over to you. This call came from Miles City. It says, with the smaller cattle herd, are we importing more beef, and is that why beef has become so expensive? And I don't think it's that expensive, but
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, the U.S. cattle herd, in terms of just total inventory, is certainly at its lowest levels, in decades. But that doesn't necessarily mean that beef production is low by the same amount. So we can keep those cattle in feedlots a little bit longer. So that means every animal that's processed, you're getting more beef out of. We also export a lot of beef too. So a combination of doing some things like adjustments in that feed chain supply gets us a little more beef. We certainly can adjust imports and exports, because there are things that we import tend to be hamburger. We tend to export a lot of things like steak and also offal, which would be kind of the less desirable cuts here in the U.S. But there's kind of a whole bunch of things, but a lower cattle, if we were able to add 10% more cattle to the U.S. herd right now, yeah, prices would probably have a downward pressure for sure.
supply and demand.
That's right.
Okay.
I'm glad you took at least one economics class.
Okay. Abby, I have a question for you, but before we get there, I don't understand this question, so I'm going to throw it to Seth because I think it's kind of interesting. Is there an ethnographic study being done at U of M? And I don't know what ethnographic is. Do you have any idea?
Well, I think there are, studying. I think there are those studies. I'd have to have a little bit more detail to be able to answer that specifically. So maybe it's a good one for follow up, Jack. I always want to be careful if I don't know the exact nature of the question to try to answer it.
I agree with you entirely. And what we'll do is we'll find out this week and answer that question next week. They also want to know what department it's associated with. Abby from Laurel. This individual has had 2 apricot trees that only produced 3 apricots total this year. That's not bad for apricots in Montana. What can they do to increase their production and yield in the future?
So apricots are really tough in the state of Montana in most locations in this state, and that's because they are marginally hardy in our climate here. And we've, for the past 2 years, have had pretty extreme winter temperatures in the late December, early January period with -35, -40, and even colder than that with wind chill. And so I think usually when you think about like production, apricots usually don't produce that much fruit here in Montana, but if you're trying to encourage a little bit more fruiting, maybe protecting those trees a little bit in those winter months, because it's those floral buds that are damaged by those cold temperatures more easily than leaf buds, and those are what are going to turn into your apricots that season. Maybe connecting with your county extension office or your local extension office to see if they have recommendations on what your fertility schedule is. You may need to add, phosphorus that helps fruit production.
You know what? Montana's not built for apricots.
It's a tough state for apricots.
Yeah, and they blossom early.
They do.
And invariably, we're going to have a frost in May or mid to late May, so that's what happens.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let's go back to Seth from Dillon. This person relies a lot on irrigation water through the course of the year, and they understand that the University of Montana does a lot of work on evaluating the snowpack and what that can do for agriculture, the predictive models. Anything to add to that, Seth, or tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, no, thanks. It's a great question, and something that we're really excited about. A number of years ago, we received from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers a grant for more than $20 million to install something called the Mesonet, which is a series of 300 weather, soil moisture, and snow monitoring stations across Montana. Why is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers interested in that? Well, the Upper Missouri Basin, it's important to know what's happening with that basin so the Corps of Engineers can know what might happen to their dams downstream. Now, the good news for us is those stations, those 300 plus stations, give us real-time data, so we can assist farmers and ranchers across that basin with moisture trends and some predictive analysis. So we've seen whether it's our drought assessment reports for the DNRC or the Governor's Drought Committee, this project, and it's run really out of our Montana Climate Office, Dr. Kelsey Jensko, who I think has been on this show before. This is an important, not just decision support tool, but better outreach for folks to understand just kind of what's happening, and so they can make better decisions.
You know, I'm going to add a little bit to that. I don't think a lot of people realize that just a little over 90%, 96% of the water used goes for irrigation and agriculture, which when I saw that figure, I was fascinated. The majority of that comes from snowpack, so those types of programs are incredibly important for the state. Jane, this came in last week from Facebook, and they're aware that you're not only a weed scientist, like I like to call you, but a noxious or invasive species expert. They want to know, are there any new invasive critters coming into Montana?
Well, probably yes. Can I think of there's definitely high priority species that the state has been working on for 5-6 years now. We've already mentioned like the zebra mussels, and that work continues, and it's a constant threat to our state. The feral pigs is another constant threat that we're really working on. There's a variety of weedy species, plants that of course I'm always talking about, so I won't mention those. But I think the best way to keep track of that is we have the Montana Invasive Species Council, which is, it's run out of the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation. But it's a collaborative effort among multiple state agencies, federal agencies, stakeholders in the state have a seat on the council, and they are the ones that are keeping the eye on the horizon for invasive species. I had the privilege of sitting on the council for about 8 years, and Dr. Jared Beaver is the extension representative on there now. But really, they're the people at the front line of visiting with our neighboring states, being aware on the national level of the different species that are close to us and threatening the state.
You know, I talked to a county agent this past week on a tour from Ecolog, and she said that they found the amaranth,
Palmer amaranth.
Yeah, down in
Yeah,
that
yes. So, yes, Amanda found a plant on the side of the road
Yeah.
because she was looking for it. Thankfully, that was a male plant. There's male and female plants of that species. The male plants don't produce seeds, so we found a single male plant. She's been scouting the area looking for more, and we haven't found any yet. And we've had a couple instances of that in the last few years. But yeah, that's a great, thanks for bringing that one up, Jack.
That's a nasty weed, and you can fertilize it with Roundup, I'm told. Or glyphosate.
Well, one of the issues with that plant, it is evolved resistance to a lot of different
You're
types of herbicides. So some of our go-to tools don't work on it.
Okay.
When a plant is found on the roadside, is that probably transported via a vehicle? Is that how it
It's
arrived
probably
here?
vehicle, equipment. It could have been in some seed that would have, if something was seeded in the field next to it,
Okay.
some escapes could have been there. It's usually very difficult to figure out exactly how something shows up, but yeah,
Okay.
likely.
Thank you. I had to bring that up. Seth, a question from Chinook, and this is really a good question. This individuals have 3 kids who will be going to college over the next 5 years. They're very concerned about the cost of college, and they say one is going to U of M, or plans to, one is going to MSU, and the other one wants to go out of state. But they don't make the type of money that you might make in Missoula, Bozeman, Helena. What assistance, or how would you help these people?
Well, thank you. It's a great question. I think the first thing I'd say is let's have all three stay in state. I will tell you, we as Montanans are blessed with an incredibly high quality university system. And importantly, we have not just quality, but we are really leading the way here in the Montana university system to keep the cost of college down. At UM, in-state students, so Montana residents, pay about $7,500 a year to attend UM, and that's 26% lower than a resident of North Dakota would pay to go to one of their institutions, and it's about 30% lower than the average across our public university peers in Western states. So that is a huge benefit, and that's something we work really hard at, to keep the cost of college low and to keep debt levels low. About a third of our students at UM graduate with zero debt. And the average debt load for our graduates is about $15,000. And so when you look at the wage premium of a college degree, look across the country, it's about $22,000-ish a year and about $1 million over the course of a lifetime. So, average debt load's about $15K. The average wage premium per year is about $22,000 with a lifetime benefit of over $1 million. It's a good value, but we do recognize at UM that for some families, that's still a stretch. It's why we implemented something we call the Grizzly Promise a couple years ago. And the Grizzly Promise is a promise that if you're a Montanan that comes from a family that makes $50,000 or less, you can actually come to the University of Montana tuition free. So we're really committed to keeping college not just high quality, but affordable.
Yeah, great answer. Thank you. And I faced that. One of my daughters, thanks for scholarships, but she went to Carnegie Mellon.
Yeah.
And that Montana State, University of Montana looks great when you compare the cost of an education at one of those schools versus here. And I shouldn't say this, but I'm not sure the quality of education is all that much better. But I did say that.
It's not. It's not. And I will tell you, and I think, look, we want to be. This is a show where you want straight answers. You can get just as good an education at the University of Montana, or at MSU for that matter, as you can at any institution in the entire country. And it's this perverse thing in higher education. People think that if you pay more, it must be better. I'm here to tell you it's not. In fact, last year, Coulter Stevenson from Amsterdam, Montana, population 207, Coulter beat out all of the top students at all the Ivies to receive a Rhodes Scholarship. And he did so from the University of Montana. And I will tell you, and look, we have great evidence right here sitting at that table of the tremendous faculty we have in the Montana University system. So I want to say loud and clear, if you're a young person, or if you're a person of any age for that matter, thinking about getting an education, you are very fortunate to be here in the state of Montana and the quality of education that you can receive here.
Very well said, and I want to add a little bit more to that. Kern and Andrea Stevenson from Amsterdam are to be commended for sending Coulter to the Montana State University system, or the Montana system. They've done a great job with Coulter. I happen to know Kern and Andrea very well. Federal Reserve.
I just saw a picture. A friend of mine was visiting Oxford and sent a picture with Coulter over there. So he's doing well and representing Montana very well over there.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. I want to shift over to Joel, and then I have one for you. But this is a trick one for you, so we'll go to Joel first. The Federal Reserve lowered interest rates recently by 0.5%. Does that impact farmers in the state? And this came from Custer, Montana.
Yeah, it sure does have an impact on Montana operations. So first of all, with the Federal Reserve, they don't actually set the rate that a farmer might borrow or invest in at a local bank, but those rates move pretty close together. So when the Federal Open Market Committee lowers that rate that banks can lend to each other, it trickles down to most other rates. Not maybe exactly, but if it goes down 0.5 point, probably the other rates are going to move in a similar fashion. So where that's going to impact Montana ag is a couple ways. One, a lot of our producers get operating loans. So when they go to get an operating loan next spring, it's probably going to be lower interest, which is going to lower their costs a little bit. Same if they're purchasing any new equipment. You know, the rate that they're going to get on equipment loans is probably going to be a little lower than before that change took place. Now, it's not necessarily going to affect a real estate loan they took out 3 or 5 or 10 years ago, but it might open up an opportunity to refinance some loans like that. And then the other thing it's going to impact kind of on the other side too is, you know, many of our farmers do have savings. It's a risky business, so a lot of them keep some cash reserves. They're investing those, you know, in banks and stocks and other things. And certainly bank rates like savings accounts and CDs tend to go down as well when the Fed lowers rates. So if you got money invested in a CD, when it comes time to renew, you're probably going to get a little lower rate than you would have. But if you're borrowing money, it's going to save you a little money coming up in the future.
Okay, I'm going to throw this to Seth. Will that impact educational loans?
You know, I'd echo what Joel said. Ultimately, it will. You know, the rates of student loans, just like mortgage loans, car loans, credit card rates, you know, that they will move, you know, in sequence with the Fed funds rate.
Okay, thank you. Your question. And I've heard this from a lot of people this year. Why didn't the apple crop produce more this year?
Yeah, you're right. I've also heard this from a lot of people this year, and I think similar to you know, apricots, apples can be hardy depending on what cultivar and what rootstock you have. But because we had such a rough winter and especially such a dry winter, we had a lot of dieback in our apples. And so when your trees are stressed out, they may not flower as much. When you have those extreme temperatures, you may lose those floral buds that are going to produce apples. So I think a combination of winter-related injuries, of how dry it had been, potentially root damage, those trees are just trying to survive. And so they're probably going to invest their energy into their root systems and trying to survive as opposed to producing that fruit. Now, if you continue to have issues with this, that would be something you'd investigate, but a lot of times when we don't have very much fruit, it's because either those flowers were damaged or those branches that have those flowering buds were damaged.
Okay, thank you. And while I have you up, and quickly tell us a little bit about why hollyhocks don't do well in the state.
Well, I would say they can do pretty well in the state. They're a good plant for if you're having a really dry landscape. They're a good xeric plant because you don't need to irrigate them very much. But these are my hollyhocks, and they're not very happy. And there are a couple things going on. So hollyhocks are prone to hollyhock rust, which causes these orangish yellow markings on the leaves themselves. This can be a pretty big issue, especially year after year. If you have this problem, it can reduce the vigor of your plants. But in addition, my hollyhocks also have hollyhock weevil, where you see the holes from those female weevils. They'll chew into those seed pods, and they're going to either feed on the seeds, or they're even going to lay their eggs in there, and their larvae will develop within the seeds. And so a combination of these have meant a lot of thinning out. And I walked around my Livingston neighborhood and found that almost every hollyhock that I came across had these hollyhock weevils. And so with both of these issues, one of the best things you can do is sanitation, which means because the weevils will nest in these seed pods and debris in the ground, and also the hollyhock rust will nest in kind of vegetation that falls down and will reinfect these plants the next year. Cleaning them up really thoroughly and preventing them from reinfesting is usually a good way to reduce those populations.
Okay, thank you. Seth, this is too good to pass up. I have to ask you. This question came from Polson. Are you ready? They
I'm
want
ready.
to know. Okay, they want to know what happened to the Grizzlies' defense yesterday.
You know, I want to know that too. All I know is, look, it's a team sport, and sometimes one part of the team has to pick up another. And I'll say the good news is you had the second highest offensive output, I think, in the history of Grizzly football. And you know, a win is a win, right? In the column, it's not a half or a 3/4 win. It's either a 1 or a 0 in the win column, and they got a win last night.
You know, I happened to watch that game, and it was an exciting ball game. The Grizz won, I think it was 51-48. but it was exciting right to the very end. So, interesting question. I had to throw it in. You can't pass up a little bit like that. Jane, this is an interesting question. It comes from Libby, and thank you up there in Libby. We don't get many questions from way up in the northwest part of the state. They want to know if it's unlawful for an individual to spray noxious weeds in forest land. And I assume that's national forest.
Yeah. Wow.
I got you, didn't I?
That's a good question. I think it. I don't know if I want to say it's unlawful, but I think it's. You would want to have a cooperative agreement or some sort of memorandum of understanding with the forest, the local forest managers. A lot of groups, volunteer groups, get together to manage noxious weeds on federal or on public lands, whether it's state or federal, including the forest. And those types of efforts are usually done in cooperation with the local ranger district. So I would certainly encourage the person to, check into it, visit with their local forest managers and try to form some sort of cooperative. Usually the Forest Service is more than happy to get the help.
And there are a lot of noxious weeds in forests along the roads and so forth.
Yeah, and you certainly are welcome to pull. I mean, I pull noxious weeds along trails all the time. My husband's often encouraging me to keep moving down the trail. But yeah, so I mean, usually they're looking for the help. So I would suggest reach out to them and figure out how to make that happen.
Okay, thank you. I think that's an interesting question. We may have to follow up a little bit more and get some more information on that. Seth, from Ritchie, Montana. And I don't know if you know where Ritchie is. It's way out in the eastern part of the state, and we don't get a lot of questions from Ritchie. So thank you out there. They say they are hearing more and more about mental health in rural communities. Can President Bodner walk us through some of the programs that U of M has to address that issue? And I might add a little bit after that, but have at it, Seth.
No, I think, look, we have a shortage of rural healthcare providers in this state, and that's from a mental health standpoint. That's from a pediatric standpoint. That we have an issue in terms of rural healthcare provision in the state of Montana, and it's something we're really focused on in our College of Health. Whether it's our programs like our physical therapy program, our pharmacy program, I mentioned our physical therapy. We're launching a PA program. We also have our psychology program, which is the only PhD granting program in the state. And then you think about things like our social work program. These are all efforts, and I could name 3 or 4 more, but these are all efforts aimed at serving the needs of Montanans, not just in cities, but across the state. And something we launched just a couple of years ago is called the Skaggs Institute for Health Innovation, which is all about outreach to rural communities and trying to minimize that gap between healthcare outcomes between rural and urban communities, because there is a gap. There's a lack of coverage, and this institute is saying we want to make sure that we have leading edge medical services in all of our communities across Montana. Things like precision medicine, where you can tailor specific pharmacological interventions based on the genetic profile of a person. Why should it be just the big cities on the coast that get that? We ought to have that here in Montana, and those are the types of things we're working on in our College of Health.
I happened to read this a couple of weeks ago, and I don't recall where I saw it, but I noted that one of the most popular courses at the U of M was called Psychology of Aging. And, that is an issue in this state. There's no doubt about it. And I'll put a plug in for a program later this month. In October, the last program of the year, matter of fact. Marcia Getting from the Econ department will be talking about mental health, dementia, Alzheimer's, some of the early symptoms, and the issues that presents in rural communities, also from a safety standpoint. So that's coming up. You know, on that note, Seth, I was told that you had a geriatric program at the U of M for a long period of time, but it's no longer existing. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened there?
You know, I'd have to look into the history. Actually, I'm actually not familiar with what happened there. But you know, I think what we try to do is look holistically at the needs of Montanans. You know, because it's, you know, you think about a geriatric patient. Yes, certainly different needs than say a pediatric patient. But there's still they have pharmacy needs. They have physician needs. They might have needs for a social worker. And those are the types of things that we're trying to look at interprofessional education for all of our programs. Again, because a lot of towns, you might have a pharmacist, and that pharmacist might be answering a lot of different types of questions. And so we're trying to send our graduates out prepared to meet the needs, not just of geriatric patients, but across the spectrum. So, but I'll follow up and get an answer to you on the history of the geriatric program.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And if you email me that answer or a little bit more about it, I'll share with the audience over the next couple of weeks what we find out. From Bozeman, I love questions like this. This is for Joel. And it's a very simple question. Why are commodity prices so low and food prices so high?
It's an excellent question, right? And it depends on if you're buying or selling, whether they're too low or too high. Well, there's a lot of things that happen between the farm gate, the actual ag producer, and when it ends up on your plate, whether that's in a grocery store or whether you're going to a restaurant and purchasing it. And there's a lot of steps in that value chain. So, you know, you might, if we think about wheat, you know, it goes to the elevator. Somebody might truck it from your farm to the elevator, or maybe you do that step. Then it probably gets sent by rail, probably to a flour mill somewhere, where it's then cleaned and processed into flour. It's probably sold to a bakery that maybe makes the bread or the cinnamon roll or the pancake mix or whatever it is that you're buying. You know, and then it ends up, and everybody along the way, you know, is adding value to this product. But then it's going to end up in a restaurant maybe, and you know, you got somebody cooking that, and of course, the cost of labor's gone up here in the last few years. You know, you're not finding somebody to work for $7 to work at your local bakery. So all of those things end up in that final cost. So, you know, the food price is certainly important, and there's supply and demand based on, like, you know, whether we had a good wheat crop or a bad wheat crop. But then there's supply and demand on each of those steps through that value chain as well.
You know, mentioning labor costs, I'm going to ask President Bodnar, is the U of M having difficulty hiring replacement professors based on the cost of living in Montana?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really difficult, actually. One of the biggest challenges we face. You know, I mentioned earlier, our goal is we have this trifecta of commitments, right? We want to have a world-class education that is accessible to everyone at an affordable price. And so that means we have to be incredibly good stewards of not just tuition dollars, but the state resources that we have. And when you're trying to replace a faculty member or a staff member that's moved on, we're trying to attract people to a community where the costs of housing are incredibly high. And that's a real challenge for us. And I think that is something that we really have to address at a state level is how do we keep cost of living manageable to make sure that we can maintain the world-class quality that we have at our university system.
I agree with you entirely. It is a difficult situation. I've got another question for you, but I want to get to Jane first a little bit on that pretty weed, or is that a garden flower?
It can be both.
Oh, it can, okay.
This is one of the species on our state noxious weed list, common tansy, that was intentionally brought to North America for medicinal purposes, but also for ornamental purposes. So this plant was 4 to 5 feet tall, so I just cut off the top to show people what it looks like. But it has these kind of fern-like looking leaves, or like a feather, kind of feathery fern-like looking leaves, and then it has these really cute pretty yellow button-like flowers. They're bright yellow starting in about mid-August, and then we're kind of at the end of the plant's life cycle for this year. The flowers are turning a little bit brown, and then you'll get the red stems as the plant continues to mature. But this is common tansy. It is on the state noxious weed list. It tends to like a little more moist habitats. I often see it growing kind of in the understory of some of the riparian forests in the Bozeman area, or you'll see it along like irrigation ditches. It has a pretty robust root system, so it's kind of like Canada thistle, where like if you were going to try mowing this, you'd have to mow it repeatedly throughout the growing season for several years. We don't have any biocontrol for this species. There are some herbicides that work on it. And it's not super competitive, so if you can keep other species doing well, they can compete with this. But I just thought I'd bring it because it's been on the list for at least 25 years, I would say, and doesn't get a lot of attention, but it is a pretty interesting plant. If you look at the history of the uses of this plant, it's pretty fun.
I won't go there, but if Tim were sitting here, I'd ask him what kind of salad he makes out of it, because
Well, it smells really pretty. I don't know if Joel can smell it at all, but it's very aromatic. And it actually has like antifungal and antibacterial qualities, and has been used, like the early colonists to North America in the 1600s used it as a preservative for food and for bodies. So there you go.
that's more than I needed to know. Okay, Seth, interesting, and this came in via email, and it probably came from Jane's relatives, but it's from Ames, Iowa, and they're watching it on some computer method. But anyway, they would like to know, why does the University of Montana have the forestry school when that's normally associated with land-grant institutions? And I don't know the answer to that. Do you have any idea, Seth?
I don't, short answer is I don't know how back, in the turn of the 20th century that was decided, that the University of Montana would have the forestry school. What I do know is we're really proud to have a fantastic school of forestry, and really grateful for the important work that our faculty in that school do. I mean, managing our forest resources arguably is more important today than ever. Understanding not just how to manage that resource, but the impact of fire and how we're seeing it. But I don't know how that was decided. You're right, but I think it speaks to the point that I made at the beginning of the show, is that you think about our universities. Montana State there in Bozeman, University of Montana in Missoula, we complement each other in a lot of ways. A lot of people like to obviously say, hey, it's Grizz versus Cats, and it is on one Saturday in November. But a lot of us come from houses divided. In fact, I myself, my wife is an MSU grad, and I think it's just a testament to the wonderful university system we have, and how these universities really are complementary.
I'll mention something about School of Forestry and how the two schools do combine a lot of their resources. The Extension Forestry, which is Montana State University funded, goes through and is housed at the University of Montana. And that's where our Extension Forester should be, is in the School of Forestry. And that, by the way, is there a pretty good enrollment in the School of Forestry? Do you have any clue?
Yeah, there sure is. In fact, it's been our fastest growing school, and speaks to students really wanting to understand, how we manage our resources, and really thinking broadly about sustainability and conservation. Again, it's not about clear cutting or we don't cut anything. It's about managing that resource, and that applies to forest resources. That applies to our wildlife resources, and what we like to say that college is really building the resource managers of tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Good points. Jane, we've had several calls about Ventonata, which Some people think it's running, we're running a losing battle. Other people want to know what to do to control it. Other people want to know where is it and what the impact on agriculture would be. So a brief introduction of Ventonata.
Yeah, Ventonata is an invasive annual grass, so it's like cheatgrass. We've had cheatgrass around for decades. Ventonata we first started noticing it increasing in the state in about 2015 to 2018. It really took off. And it's kind of, I like to tell people, it kind of moved along the I-90 corridor is where I noticed it. So I first worked with it in northwestern Montana. It's in Gallatin County. You move along I-90, it's in southeastern Montana. So that's where it is. Every now and then it shows up a little bit more. We've seen it in Cascade County. One of the biggest concerns with Ventonata is it has a very high silica content. And silica is an element that glass is made out of.
Right.
So when plants have a lot of silica in them, animals don't like to eat it. So for like cheatgrass, you can get some forage value out of that for wildlife and livestock. What we've seen so far is Ventonata doesn't offer any of that forage value. So that's one of the big concerns. It's also just a species I've seen spread faster than any other species during my career thus far. So it does have pretty high invasive capacity, but we're still learning about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your homework assignment next time you're on, I don't know what it looks like. And a lot of people probably that are somewhat familiar with leafy spurge, things like that,
Yeah.
Canada thistle, probably know what those look like. You have to bring a sample.
I'll
in.
try to, right now, just this past week, the seedlings come up in the fall, and right now the seedlings are about this tall with a single leaf that's about the width of a high-pitched guitar string. So it's not very showy, but I can bring in some samples from previous years that we've collected and placed in frames.
Okay, thank you. Seth, interesting call. It comes from Lewistown. This person acknowledges that MSU and the University of Montana compete in a lot of different areas, especially athletically. Do they compete for funding at the legislative level in the state? That's kind of an interesting question.
Well, we work with the legislature, as a system. So we have a commissioner of higher education, and that commissioner works with the legislature to set funding levels for the Montana University system. And then the Board of Regents allocates that state funding to the various institutions, MSU, and then the other 4-year campuses and the 2-year campuses across the state. So, and that's based on a formula. It's based somewhat on enrollment. There's a performance funding aspect to it, but no, when it comes to speaking with the legislature, we speak as a university system and advocate on behalf of all the institutions in the state.
And my compliments to you and President Cruzado. You guys do a good job in speaking for the university system. I do want to follow up on the university system a little bit. Montana State University has Northern, Billings. What are some of the other university systems associated with University of Montana?
Yeah, so you really have what we call kind of two hemispheres, two affiliations. So you have on the east side of the divide, you have Northern Billings, Great Falls College affiliated with MSU and Bozeman, and then on the west side of the divide, you have the University of Montana, and then Montana Tech, which sits obviously right close to the divide there, and then University of Montana Western down in Dillon, and Helena College. So that forms what we call the University of Montana affiliation, and what that means is we really work together to be as efficient as we can, not just to save resources in terms of back office shared services, but to make sure that a student in Dillon can benefit from programming at the University of Montana and vice versa. So we really work to be close affiliates, each with our individual campus identities, but working together because we can not only be more efficient, but we can better serve our students when we collaborate.
Excellent answer. And I'm going to follow that up while we have you up. This question comes from Three Forks, your stomping grounds. They would like to know, does the University of Montana have any programs similar to the extension service that MSU has? In other words, outreach around the state.
Yes. Yeah, several. I mean, I mentioned already the Flathead Lake Biological Station that does just a tremendous amount of work specifically around Flathead Lake and other bodies of water. And then we have our forest experiment station. So Lubric Experimental Forest is a 58,000 acre experimental forest where we're managing and experimenting and learning about effective forest management techniques. I already mentioned the Montana Climate Office, which has more than 300 climate monitoring stations across the state. And then we have a whole host of efforts like the Bureau of Business and Economic Research. And I'm grateful you're going to have Pat Barkey, the director of the BBER, on the show, which does a lot of economic modeling and forecasting and information providing for the state. And then we have things like Spectrum, which is the Spectrum Discovery Area, which is bringing science education to youth, not just in Missoula, but across the entire state. Served 84 different communities through our Spectrum efforts in libraries and primary schools, things like that. So a number of activities that are similar to that. And then a big one that I want to emphasize, and then I'll stop, which is called Accelerate Montana. Accelerate Montana is really an effort to meet the economic and workforce needs of our state, to deliver training and education in partnership with employers. So short-term, not-for-credit training in things like construction, cybersecurity, software development, commercial driver's license training. And to date, we've put about 3,000 Montanans, not just in Missoula, but across the state, all the way out to Miles City and elsewhere, through a short-term program to get people the training they need to get into the workforce and give employers the staffing they need to deliver for their customers.
Thank you. I think what Seth has just pointed out and what we've done here for years shows you that Montana does have a very vibrant and a very knowledgeable and very active university system. And people need to take advantage of it. There's so many opportunities to interact with faculty, both at the U of M and Montana State University. So I encourage people, if you have questions, if you have concerns, needs, get a hold of either your extension office, somebody at the U of M. Don't be afraid to ask, because there's a lot of assistance out there for you. We're getting a little low on time, so I'm going to just throw a few questions out. From Helen, a caller says their lilacs are losing leaves and the leaves have been chewed around the edges. Any idea what it is?
Yeah, so the chewed around the edges is probably a root weevil damage if you see like perfect semicircular notches. In terms of losing leaves, that might be a good thing to contact your local extension office to confirm if that's the pest and come up with the idea of how you manage them. But that sounds like root weevil damage.
Okay, thank you. Joel, quick one. I like this. They want to know what the price of wheat will be on January 1st.
Oh, well, that's easy. Yes, it'll have a price.
That's a typical economic answer. I'm sure somebody wants to sell next year and not this year.
Yeah, and you do see a lot of folks wait till January 2nd for tax reasons, to start pricing some of their wheat.
Okay, I have you up. This is an interesting Facebook question for you. Would red beets be a viable cash crop in northern Stillwater County?
Oh, that's a good one. That's one I don't think I've had before. Yeah, I'd have to look into that.
Okay, you got to have a lot of people that want to eat beets, and
true.
I don't think we have, and they don't ship well.
I don't think you can pile them like sugar beets.
No, I don't think you can either. Seth, quickly, a caller from Bozeman, a junior in high school, interested in wildlife management. Is it difficult for a student to get into the University of Montana Wildlife Management program?
No, in fact, we do our best to accept every qualified student, especially at the undergraduate level. As you get into the grad degree programs, there is more limited capacity. But if you're an undergraduate student or a junior in high school, especially as a Montanan, you are incredibly lucky because you're able to come to one of the best programs, often ranked #1 in North America in wildlife biology, and you're able to come at a fraction of the price that people come from all over the country to study wildlife biology at the university. So come on over. We'd love to have you.
You know, I knew a lot of people here years ago that were in wildlife biology, Bob Ing, people like that. They spoke highly of both programs. So it's an interesting program. Jobs are difficult to come by sometimes. So with that, folks, we're getting down to the end. I want to thank the panel, Jane, Joel, President Bodner, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to have more of your faculty over the next couple of years, maybe some grad students next spring. Abby, always a pleasure. Folks, next week we're going to be looking at the Grain Growers Association. The president of the Grain Growers will be joining us, Boyd Heilig. He's from Central Montana. And I think you'll enjoy learning a little bit more about grain, which still comprises about 40% of our cash crops for our state. So join us, have a good week, and thanks again. Good night.
For more information and resources, visit montanapbs.org/aglive.
Montana Ag Live is made possible by the Montana Department of Agriculture, MSU Extension, the MSU Ag Experiment Station of the College of Agriculture, the Montana Wheat and Barley Committee, Cashman Nursery and Landscaping, and the Gallatin Gardeners Club.